A shared trailer, a love scene rehearsed one too many times, a marriage that quietly ended before the film even wrapped. Some of these relationships became the stuff of Hollywood legend, celebrated decades later as genuine love stories that outlasted the scandal of how they began. Others ended careers, reputations, and families in the process, leaving behind a spouse who found out from a tabloid rather than a phone call. A few of the people involved have spent decades defending what happened on set, while others have simply stopped discussing it altogether. Here is what the record actually shows. Number 12. Ryan Phillippe and Abby Cornish. Ryan Phillippe and Reese Witherspoon met in 1997 at her 21st birthday party and married in 1999, the same year they appeared together as step-siblings in the teen drama Cruel Intentions, going on to become one of Hollywood's most visible young couples over the following 7 years, and raising 2 children together, daughter Ava and son Deacon. In 2006, Phillippe began filming the war drama Stop Loss alongside Australian actress Abby Cornish, and reports soon surfaced that the two had grown close during production in Austin, Texas. According to entertainment reporters covering the story at the time, Phillippe made little effort to hide the relationship, with one correspondent noting that he and Cornish were seen together at restaurants and that she had been spotted leaving his apartment on multiple occasions. Witherspoon reportedly confronted him after discovering evidence of the affair on his phone, and according to a source who spoke to tabloid press at the time, Phillippe admitted the rumors were true during that confrontation. Witherspoon and Phillippe filed for divorce that October, citing irreconcilable differences. Phillippe publicly denied ever cheating on Witherspoon, arguing in a statement that their marriage had faced difficulties long before the Cornish rumors surfaced, and calling it unfair that Cornish had been singled out for blame in the press. Regardless of the dispute over what exactly happened, Phillippe and Cornish began dating openly within months of the divorce filing and remained together for nearly 3 years afterward, finally splitting in 2010. A far more visually undeniable scandal broke 6 years later, when a single set of photographs left no room for public denial at all, unlike the ambiguous rumors that had trailed Phillippe for years without ever being fully confirmed. Number 11. Kristen Stewart and Rupert Sanders. Kristen Stewart had become one of the most recognizable young actresses in the world through the Twilight film series, and by 2012, she was in a long-term relationship with her Twilight co-star Robert Pattinson, one of the most closely watched celebrity couples of the era, with fans and press alike referring to them by the combined nickname Robston and tracking their relationship with an intensity rarely seen even by Hollywood standards, down to analyzing their body language at every joint public appearance. That same year, Stewart starred in Snow White and the Huntsman, directed by Rupert Sanders, who was married to model and actress Liberty Ross and had 2 young children with her. In July 2012, a British tabloid published photographs showing Stewart and Sanders in an intimate embrace inside a vehicle, taken weeks earlier during a private outing away from set. The images spread within hours, appearing on nearly every major entertainment outlet by the following morning, and both Stewart and Sanders issued public apologies the same day the photos surfaced, with Stewart specifically apologizing to Pattinson for what she called a momentary indiscretion that had jeopardized the most important relationship of her life. Ross and Sanders separated shortly afterward, finalizing their divorce the following year, and Stewart and Pattinson's relationship, already strained according to people close to the couple, ended for good within weeks of the photographs becoming public. The scandal dominated entertainment coverage for months, in part because the images themselves left nothing open to interpretation or denial in the way many other celebrity affair rumors had, and studio executives reportedly expressed concern at the time about the effect the story might have on the box office prospects of Stewart's other upcoming films. Both Stewart and Pattinson continued working together on the final Twilight installment, Breaking Dawn Part 2, which was still in post-production at the time the scandal broke, requiring the two to complete promotional obligations together despite the very public and painful nature of their breakup. Stewart later described the period as the most difficult of her young adult life, telling one interviewer years afterward that she felt she had let down not only Pattinson, but an entire fan base that had invested heavily in their relationship. Sanders, for his part, largely retreated from public commentary on the affair, focusing instead on his directing career, and he and Ross eventually finalized their divorce in 2013. A different scandal from a few years earlier proved just as damaging, though it took considerably longer to fully unravel. and it eventually reshaped reality television as much as it reshaped the two marriages it ended, turning one of the wronged spouses into a media personality in her own right. Number 10. LeAnn Rimes and Eddie Cibrian. Country singer LeAnn Rimes and actor Eddie Cibrian met in 2008 while filming the television movie Northern Lights, both married to other people at the time. Rimes was married to dancer Dean Sharramet, whom she had wed in 2002, while Cibrian was married to Brandi Glanville, with whom he had 2 young sons and had been together for roughly a decade. Photographs of Rimes and Cibrian together began circulating in 2009, showing the two on a vacation together, despite both still being legally married. And both marriages collapsed within months of the story breaking publicly, with tabloid coverage of the affair dominating entertainment headlines for the better part of that year. Glanville later became a prominent figure on reality television, joining the cast of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills in 2011, in large part by openly and repeatedly discussing the affair and its aftermath on multiple shows, keeping the story in the public eye for years after it initially broke and building much of her media career directly around it. Rimes and Cibrian divorced their respective spouses and married each other in April 2011 in a ceremony held in California. Rimes later described the period as the most difficult of her life, acknowledging in interviews that the public backlash toward her had been severe and, in her view, considerably harsher than the criticism directed at Cibrian for the same affair, a disparity she attributed partly to her prior image as a wholesome country music star since childhood. Sharramet, for his part, largely stayed out of the public feuding that followed, speaking only occasionally about the end of his marriage to Rimes, and generally declining to participate in the ongoing media narrative that Glanville continued to drive for years afterward. Rimes and Cibrian went on to build a very public life together, including a joint reality series, and Rimes has said in later interviews that she and Glanville eventually reached a degree of civility, if not warmth, once enough time had passed, and both women had moved further into their respective new lives. A scandal from more than a decade earlier followed a nearly identical pattern. 2 married actors falling for each other during a modest film production that suddenly found itself the subject of far more attention than its box office performance ever generated, and that ultimately reshaped both of their careers in ways neither could have predicted going into the shoot. Number 9. Melanie Griffith and Antonio Banderas. Melanie Griffith had been married to actor Don Johnson, her on-again, off-again partner since the 1970s, for the second time when she began filming the 1995 comedy Too Much, alongside Spanish actor Antonio Banderas, who was at the time a rising international star, still establishing himself in American films after a successful career in Spanish cinema, working extensively with director Pedro Almodóvar. The production called for the two to play romantic leads opposite each other, and reports at the time described an immediate connection between them during filming that surprised colleagues on set. Griffith and Johnson divorced in 1996, and Griffith married Banderas the same year in a ceremony in London, a turnaround fast enough to draw significant tabloid attention, given how recently she and Johnson had reconciled from their earlier divorce in the 1970s. Griffith and Banderas remained married for nearly 2 decades, raising a daughter, Stella, together, before divorcing themselves in 2015 after 18 years of marriage. Griffith later spoke about the relationship's origins with some candor, acknowledging in interviews that she had fallen for Banderas quickly and intensely, while still legally married to Johnson, though she generally avoided detailed public discussion of the overlap between the two relationships, preferring instead to describe the connection with Banderas as instant and undeniable from the moment they began working together. Johnson has rarely discussed the end of the marriage in detail publicly, though he and Griffith later mended their relationship enough to remain on cordial terms for the sake of their daughter, actress Dakota Johnson, born during their first marriage to each other in the 1980s. Banderas, for his part, has spoken warmly about his years with Griffith, even after their eventual divorce, describing the marriage as an important and formative chapter of his life, despite how it began. An eerily similar pattern played out 5 years later with an entirely different pair of actors, though this particular case involved a much more high-profile husband and produced one of the most widely covered celebrity divorces of its decade, one that dominated magazine covers for months on end. Number 8. Meg Ryan and Russell Crowe. By 2000, Meg Ryan had spent a decade as one of Hollywood's most bankable romantic comedy leads, having starred in hits including When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and You've Got Mail. She had been married to actor Dennis Quaid since 1991, with whom she had a young son, Jack, born in 1992. That year, Ryan starred opposite Russell Crowe in the thriller Proof of Life, playing the wife of a kidnapped engineer opposite Crowe's hostage negotiator, and tabloid reports soon began describing an unusually close bond between the two co-stars during filming in Ecuador. Ryan and Quaid separated in June 2000, shortly before Proof of Life was released that December, and the timing fueled widespread public speculation connecting the split directly to Crowe, speculation that intensified further after paparazzi photographed Ryan and Crowe together on more than one occasion in the months that followed. Ryan never fully confirmed or denied a romantic relationship with Crowe in detail, though she acknowledged in interviews around the film's release that the marriage had been troubled well before filming began, and that she did not want to place the blame for the divorce on any single outside factor. The relationship with Crowe, whatever its precise nature, did not last beyond the film's promotional cycle, and Ryan and Quaid's divorce was finalized in 2001. The affair rumors nonetheless followed Ryan for years, marking a noticeable shift in her public image, away from the wholesome romantic lead persona she had built through the 1990s, and toward a more scrutinized, tabloid-driven narrative that persisted well after the divorce itself had been finalized. Quaid has spoken about the divorce only occasionally over the years, generally focusing on his relationship with their son rather than revisiting the circumstances of the split itself. Ryan, meanwhile, largely stepped back from the kind of high-profile romantic lead roles that had defined her career in the years following the divorce, a shift she has attributed to a combination of factors, including the intense scrutiny that followed her through the early 2000s. A less ambiguous case unfolded the year before Ryan and Crowe's film premiered, involving an Oscar-winning actor whose marriage lasted barely longer than the shoot that ended it, and whose whirlwind romance became just as famous for its intensity as for how it began. Number 7. Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie. Billy Bob Thornton was engaged to actress Laura Dern, having been together for roughly 3 years and living together for much of that time, when he began filming the 1999 comedy Pushing Tin alongside Angelina Jolie. According to accounts from those close to the production, Thornton and Jolie grew close during filming in a way that surprised even people who had worked with both actors before, with the connection reportedly intensifying quickly over the course of the shoot. Thornton and Dern's engagement ended abruptly before the film's release, without Dern reportedly receiving a personal explanation directly from Thornton beforehand, learning of the situation instead through media reports that had already begun circulating. Thornton and Jolie married in Las Vegas in May 2000, in a ceremony so sudden that few in either of their circles had advanced knowledge of it, reportedly organized within hours of the couple deciding to go through with it, with Thornton later saying in interviews that the decision felt less like a choice and more like something neither of them could resist once it was in motion. Their marriage became known for its unusually intense public displays of affection, including matching tattoos bearing each other's names and vials of each other's blood worn as jewelry around their necks, a detail that drew significant media attention at the time as evidence of how quickly and completely the two had become consumed by the relationship. The marriage ended in divorce in 2003, roughly 3 years after it began. Jolie later addressed the relationship's whirlwind nature in interviews without directly discussing the circumstances of Thornton's breakup with Dern, generally describing the period as intense and consuming rather than offering specific details about its beginning. Dern has spoken about the end of the engagement only rarely in the years since, generally declining to dwell publicly on the circumstances, though she has acknowledged in passing interviews that learning about it through the press rather than directly from Thornton made an already painful situation considerably harder to process. Thornton and Jolie's divorce in 2003 was finalized quietly compared to the intensity of their courtship, with both actors moving on to new, longer-lasting relationships in the years that followed. The next relationship on this list followed an almost identical arc, this time ending a marriage that much of the public had followed closely for years and considered one of the most stable in the industry. Number 6. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Brad Pitt had been married to actress Jennifer Aniston since 2000, a union widely regarded at the time as one of Hollywood's most solid celebrity marriages, and closely followed by fans who considered them one of the industry's defining couples. In 2004, Pitt began filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith opposite Angelina Jolie, playing a married couple secretly working as rival assassins, a role that required extensive on-screen chemistry between the two leads throughout a production that stretched across several months. Rumors of a connection between Pitt and Jolie began circulating during filming, fueled partly by paparazzi photographs of the two spending time together off-set. Though both actors initially denied any romantic involvement in interviews promoting the film, with Pitt telling one reporter at the time that the chemistry audiences saw on screen was simply good acting rather than anything real. Pitt and Aniston announced their separation in January 2005, months before Mr. and Mrs. Smith was released that June, and the timing fueled intense public scrutiny of Pitt's relationship with Jolie, with numerous magazine covers directly speculating about a connection between the film and the marriage's collapse. Pitt and Jolie did not publicly confirm their relationship until months later, and the couple, often referred to in the press using the combined nickname Brangelina, became one of the most photographed pairs in the world over the following decade, eventually having 6 children together, marrying in 2014 before divorcing in 2016 amid a lengthy and highly publicized legal dispute. Aniston has spoken about the period only sparingly over the years, generally declining to directly confirm what role, if any, the Mr. and Mrs. Smith production played in the timing of her marriage's end, though she has acknowledged in later interviews that the divorce and its surrounding coverage were among the most difficult periods of her public life. A case from the early 2000s carried a similarly public fallout, though this one involved a partner who was not simply left behind quietly, but was 7 months away from giving birth when the news broke. Number 5. Billy Crudup and Claire Danes. Billy Crudup had been in a relationship with actress Mary Louise Parker for roughly 7 years, the two having met while co-starring in a 1996 Broadway revival of Bus Stop and building a relationship largely out of the public eye compared to many Hollywood couples, when he began filming the 2004 film Stage Beauty alongside Claire Danes in 2003. Parker was 7 months pregnant with the couple's first child at the time production wrapped, a pregnancy both of them had reportedly planned and wanted deeply. Representatives for Crudup and Parker confirmed to the press in December 2003 that the couple had separated, with a source close to Parker describing the situation to reporters as extremely difficult given how deliberately the pregnancy had been planned by both of them and how far along she already was by the time the split became public. Crudup began a relationship with Danes shortly afterward, and the two dated for roughly 3 years before eventually separating themselves in 2006. Danes, reflecting on the scandal more than a decade later in a radio interview with Howard Stern, said she had simply been in love with him at 24 years old and had not fully understood what the public consequences of that would be, adding that the intense public backlash toward her personally had been one of the hardest experiences of her career up to that point. Parker gave birth to their son, William, in January 2004. And despite the circumstances of their split, she and Crudup have continued to co-parent amicably in the years since, with Parker later offering warm public remarks when Crudup eventually married actress Naomi Watts in June 2023. Long before any of these modern scandals played out across tabloids and gossip blogs, a nearly identical drama unfolded in the early 1970s between two of the biggest movie stars in the world, and it happened in front of one of the most notoriously difficult directors in Hollywood history. Number 4. Clint Eastwood and Sandra Locke. Clint Eastwood had been married to Maggie Johnson since 1953, with whom he had 2 children, when he cast Sandra Locke in his 1976 film The Outlaw Josie Wales. Locke, who had earned an Academy Award nomination years earlier for The Heart is a Lonely Hunter at just 20 years old, was herself legally married to childhood friend Gordon Anderson, though by her own account their marriage had never been romantic, since Anderson was openly gay, and the two never divorced, despite living largely separate romantic lives. Eastwood and Locke began a relationship during filming that lasted 13 years, during which the two lived together and made 6 additional films as a pair, even as Eastwood remained legally married to Johnson for much of that period, only finalizing his divorce in 1984, 9 years after the affair with Locke had begun. According to a biography of Eastwood published decades later, he had described his own infidelities during the Johnson marriage as something close to an addiction, admitting that he pursued women in acting classes and around the studio lots where he worked throughout the relationship. The relationship with Locke ended acrimoniously in 1989, when Locke returned home from directing a separate film, Impulse, to discover that Eastwood had changed the locks on the house they shared. Locke later wrote in her memoir that Eastwood had pressured her into ending 2 pregnancies during their relationship because he did not want additional children, a claim Eastwood has denied. Locke sued Eastwood for palimony, reaching a settlement in 1990 that included a development deal worth roughly $1.5 million for her to direct films at Warner Brothers, before suing him again in 1996, alleging the deal itself had been a deliberate fraud designed to keep her quiet since the studio never seriously considered any of her proposed projects, a case she also won. Locke died of cancer in 2018 at age 74, having spent much of her later career defined publicly by the relationship far more than by her own acting or directing work. Eastwood has generally declined to discuss the more damaging claims from Locke's memoir in detail, though he has acknowledged in interviews over the years that the relationship's end was bitter and that the ensuing legal battles consumed a significant amount of both their time and public reputations well into the 1990s. Locke's later career never approached the commercial success of her years working alongside Eastwood, a fact she addressed with some bitterness in interviews before her death, describing the lawsuits as necessary but professionally costly, regardless of their outcomes. Nearly identical in shape, but even more scandalous at the time it happened, the next case involved a leading man so famous for his cool detachment that the affair itself became inseparable from the film that caused it. Number 3. Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen. Ali MacGraw was married to Paramount studio executive Robert Evans, with whom she had a young son named Josh, born in 1971, when Evans himself encouraged her to take the lead role opposite Steve McQueen in the 1972 action film The Getaway, directed by Sam Peckinpah. MacGraw has since described falling for McQueen almost immediately once filming began on location in Texas in early 1972, later writing in her memoir that she became consumed by the connection between them from nearly the moment he stepped into her world, saying there was never enough air for her to breathe to change how she felt. MacGraw filed for divorce from Evans before the end of 1972, the same year The Getaway was released, and married McQueen the following July in a small outdoor ceremony attended mostly by the couple's children, officiated by a local judge who had to be pulled off a golf course to perform it, a detail the judge himself later recounted with amusement to reporters. The relationship between MacGraw and McQueen was turbulent from the start, marked by mutual jealousy, McQueen's own infidelities carried out partly in retaliation for suspicions he held about MacGraw, and years of conflict that MacGraw later attributed partly to insecurities on both sides of the marriage. McQueen also reportedly required MacGraw to sign a prenuptial agreement stipulating that she would seek nothing from him financially in the event of a divorce, and she agreed to the terms. The couple divorced in 1978 after 5 years of marriage. At the time, entertainment writers frequently compared the publicity surrounding the MacGraw-McQueen affair to one other Hollywood scandal from a decade earlier, one widely considered the standard against which every subsequent on-set affair would be measured for years afterward. MacGraw later reflected with some regret on the financial terms she had accepted at McQueen's insistence, telling one interviewer decades afterward that she wished she had thought more practically about securing her own future rather than approaching the divorce with what she called a naive belief that doing the right thing would be its own reward. McQueen died of cancer in 1980, 2 years after their divorce, and MacGraw has continued to speak about their relationship in interviews and her own memoir with a mixture of fondness and clear-eyed acknowledgement of how difficult it had actually been. Before either of those relationships existed, an entirely different set of 2 actors had already established the basic template for a Hollywood set turning into the site of a real-life marriage, decades before the tabloid industry as it exists today had even fully formed. Number 2. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Humphrey Bogart was married to actress Mayo Methot, his third wife, when 19-year-old newcomer Lauren Bacall was cast opposite him in 1944's To Have and Have Not, her very first film role, playing a young drifter opposite Bogart's charter boat captain. Bogart and Methot's marriage, nicknamed the Battling Bogarts by the press due to their frequent, often violent public arguments, had reportedly included at least one occasion when Methot stabbed Bogart during a fight, and the union was already deeply strained by the time filming began. Bogart and Bacall grew close during production, with Bogart reportedly kissing her for the first time outside her trailer partway through the shoot, catching her by surprise and marking, by her own later account, the true beginning of their relationship, rather than any single dramatic declaration. Director Howard Hawks, who had discovered Bacall and initially had his own designs on managing her career, reportedly grew frustrated as the on-set romance developed against his wishes. Bogart moved out of the home he shared with Methot in December 1944, and Methot filed for divorce the following spring, finalized on May 10, 1945. Bogart and Bacall married 11 days later, on May 21, 1945, in the home of a novelist friend in rural Ohio, and remained together until Bogart's death from esophageal cancer in January 1957. Despite the scandalous circumstances of how their relationship began, with a 25-year age gap that also drew significant comment at the time, Bogart and Bacall are remembered today as one of classic Hollywood's most genuinely devoted couples. A reputation built over 4 films together and 12 years of marriage that largely eclipsed the public disapproval that had greeted their union at the very start. Bacall later wrote candidly about the age gap and the circumstances of how their relationship began in her own autobiography, acknowledging that part of her attraction to Bogart came from a longing for a stabilizing, almost paternal presence in her life at 19, a dynamic she said only deepened her devotion to him rather than complicating it. Methot, largely forgotten by history after the divorce, struggled with alcoholism in the years that followed and died in 1951 at the age of 47, remembered publicly mostly as a footnote in the story of the marriage that replaced her own. Even that scandal, as widely covered as it was in its era, would eventually be dwarfed by a single film production nearly 2 decades later, one that became so notorious it remains the benchmark every other entry on this list is still measured against. Number 1. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Elizabeth Taylor was married to singer Eddie Fisher, her 4th husband, when she was cast as the lead in 20th Century Fox's enormously expensive 1963 production of Cleopatra, opposite Welsh actor Richard Burton, who was himself married to Sybil Williams, his wife of over a decade, and the mother of his 2 daughters. Filming had already been delayed for months by production troubles, cast changes, and Taylor's own serious health emergency, which required an emergency tracheotomy in London before Burton joined the cast, and the two began a relationship almost immediately once shooting resumed in Rome in 1962. The affair became public before the film was even released, generating a level of media frenzy that had genuinely never been seen before around a celebrity relationship, extending well beyond entertainment coverage into mainstream news and even direct condemnation from the Vatican's own newspaper, which published an open letter accusing Taylor of what it called erotic vagrancy and questioning her fitness as a mother. A member of the United States Congress reportedly even proposed barring the couple from re-entering the country over the scandal, though the measure never advanced. Both Taylor and Burton divorced their respective spouses, and the two married in March 1964, going on to make 11 more films together and to divorce and remarry each other once more over the following decade and a half, becoming as famous for the volatility of their relationship, including public fights and reconciliations played out in front of photographers, as for either of their individual careers. Burton later wrote in his own diaries that meeting Taylor on the set of Cleopatra had completely altered the course of his life, for better and for worse, in roughly equal measure by his own account, describing the attraction between them as immediate and overwhelming from their very first scenes together. Decades later, entertainment historians still routinely cite the Taylor-Burton affair as the moment modern celebrity tabloid culture, in its recognizable form, effectively began, with every subsequent co-star scandal on this list unfolding in the shadow of the template that Cleopatra first created nearly 2 generations earlier. Sybil Williams, Burton's first wife, largely withdrew from public life following the divorce, raising their 2 daughters away from the spotlight that had consumed her marriage, while Eddie Fisher's career and public standing never fully recovered from the scandal, a decline he addressed with visible bitterness in interviews for decades afterward. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.